Everyone is building an AI startup, and it makes sense. We're in a time of unprecedented investment dollars. In the first 4 months of 2024, there's been 50 billion US dollars invested in AI based startups. That's the same as all of 2023. When we look at some of the biggest companies and the valuations that are just exploding, OpenAI in early 2024 was given a valuation of $86 billion. And closely behind it was Anthropic, which was given a valuation of 15 billion, which has tripled over the last year. But it's so hard to find all of these new startups that are coming out. There's no centralized database. There's no way to find anything beyond the top 50, the top 70, top 100 that come out in these big lists. It's overwhelming for people to understand how to find the right tools or the right companies that are worth investing their time and their budgets in. So how many will actually survive? How do these companies and these startups find those investment dollars and find that market fit?
There's actually a huge flood of AI products right now because there's a ton of investment. The hype is pushing this right now. That hype used to be pushing bubbles related to crypto, Web3, fintech, social, all kinds of things. But right now, the crazy valuations are with AI. Yesterday, I was listening to a Scott Galloway podcast, and he had an investor on there, Josh Wolf. And he had an interesting point, which is basically that the actual investors that jumped in on the AI hype cycle 3, 4, or 5 years ago are the ones that are going to get the real returns. The ones coming in now, they're going to have ridiculous expectations. So it's going to be hard for these AI products to actually meet their expectations and hit their targets. So it's going to be a lot more pressure on the valuations, and it's going to be much harder for these startups to succeed as a result.
Yeah, I mean, if we think about the dot-com bubble, this is incredibly reminiscent of that time. One of the reasons that the dot-com bubble existed in the first place was because all of a sudden people had computers in their homes. It was easy to build a website, to build an e-commerce site, and capital was readily available. And so we saw this influx of companies and startups that didn't really have a proper use case. They never really got a market fit, and they never really got adoption. And so when the cost of that capital started to go up, started to increase, and people got fearful of investing in things that were maybe not as stable, so many of those companies still had never really found their footing, never really found usability. And so when the funding stopped, they just ceased to exist. And I think we're in a place right now with AI where everyone is rushing to be the first to use the technology and not really thinking about those business needs or those human needs, that when that funding starts to go the other direction, it'll be really a struggle.
This wide range of AI products are going to have to start to find their product market fit. The problem is many of them are just built on top of OpenAI or Anthropic, and they don't really have a clear IP. Meanwhile, others are basically more like features and maybe won't be worth paying for as a consumer. And in fairness, a lot of the current products don't have a clear monetization plan, or to be fair, even a monetization plan that perhaps might make sense given what these products can do.
Today, we're going to be talking with Ben Yoskovitz. He's an entrepreneur, investor, and author. He's currently a founding partner at Highline Beta, a hybrid venture studio and venture capital firm. Early on, he started Year One Labs, which was acquired by Airbnb. He also ran product at Go Instant, which was acquired by Salesforce, and Virage Sale, which raised 30 million from Sequoia and Lightspeed Capital. Ben is the co-author of Lean Analytics, a book that combines lean startup methodologies with data to help startups build better products and businesses.
Ben, I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you. So, way back in 2014, hard to believe it's been 10 years, but Peter Thiel, the notorious founder and investor of many things, including Facebook and PayPal, published the book Zero to One. He detailed how to take a startup product idea to market. It really served as a manifesto to many founders and led in many ways to the explosion of startup culture. But the year before, you and Alistair Kroll published a book called Lean Analytics, a book that I genuinely really loved at the time. It really changed my perspective on how to think about measurement and products. But that book, Lean Analytics, it served as what seemed to be a more actionable roadmap on how to build a startup and how to get them to the point where they find the product market fit. I'd love to know, how is it that you 10 years later, are still obsessed about this topic today?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. How did I get obsessed with the topic is uh, mostly from failing a bunch of times and being frustrated by building things that nobody wanted, despite the best intentions to build things. Like nobody goes out with the intention of building things that nobody wants, of course. And so it's mostly from failing and realizing, wait a second, we built a thing, we spent a bunch of time, a bunch of money, neither of which you can get back. And no customer wanted it. We were solving the wrong problem. We were solving it in the wrong way. And then in 2010, started Year One Labs with three other partners, including Alistair, who I co-wrote the book with, Ian Ray, and Raymond Luck. And Year One Labs was really a one-year experiment designed to build and fund companies from zero. And it was right around the time that Lean Startup was coming out. Eric Ries was writing content, and I remember reading that. And I remember reading Stephen Blank's Four Steps to the Epiphany and thinking that book had been written specifically for me, which obviously Mr. Blank did not write the book for me, and thinking, oh my God, I made all those mistakes. And so Lean Startup is emerging. It feels very theoretical. It feels logical in a way, but also very theoretical. And so, we were going through this Year One Labs exercise with five super early stage companies. And we said, well, going through build, measure, learn cycles, trying to make Lean Startup practical. And out of that, we said, well, let's try to write this down and put it into book format so we can take Lean Startup plus our sort of experience with analytics and data and blend those things together. Again, not to be overly prescriptive, because I don't think there's a formula, but to try to move Lean Startup from high level theory into practical execution.
Met you back in 2017. You just founded Highline Beta, a venture studio based in Toronto. You founded it with Marcus Daniels and Lauren Robinson. This venture studio, it sounded like something really innovative, and I was really, really intrigued. You were really focused on how to improve the likelihood of success of new ideas, getting in the market, really pushing forward this idea of 0 to 1 with higher success. Can you tell us a bit about that process you were using and still are using now?
Sure. I mean, the venture studio model, for those that maybe aren't familiar, the way I describe a venture studio is you have to be building and funding companies from zero. So you have to be doing both. And that's an important distinction, I think, from being a straight up investor or straight up more dev shop where you're building things. And so my co-founder and my co-founder Marcus Daniels, we started Highline Beta. Now it's almost 8 years with the idea of how do we build and fund companies. That's really what we enjoy doing. We love investing at the earliest stage, often when nobody else is willing to write a check, but we didn't want to be just investors. We wanted to build as well and help founders go through the process of doing validation work, uh, let's say properly, in a more rigorous way. To again, always with this mindset of let's minimize waste of time and money. We've iterated the model many times over. I won't go into all of those details. Like any startup, we've pivoted, we've learned, we've adapted, we've made plenty of mistakes. But ultimately, for us, it's about finding a real problem that actually matters, validating that rigorously, trying to build the smallest version of the product that we need to prove that we are right, that we're actually going to solve a problem, that there's a feasible thing to build and a viable business model, uh, investing capital, but also then bringing other capital partners in, maybe corporate partners in as well to try to accelerate that first big customer or first big partner. So it's less of a formula and more of a recipe that, whenever you see a recipe online or in a recipe book, if people still have recipe books, and you try to follow it precisely, it never quite works out exactly, like the cake never looks exactly the right. That's what building startups is like as well. And so that's because it's just too precise and there are too many variables. So for me, it's bring all the ingredients in and try your best to make something valuable.
Have you found that in that 8 years that you've been doing this with Highline Beta, that investing in and supporting new ventures has changed much since 2017?
Well, I mean, we went through the 2020, 2021 sort of like crazy valuations, tons of capital going into companies. We were, I would say, like largely unaffected by that, in part because most of the startups we were building were still extremely early stage. So, there are not many examples of companies in our portfolio that went on to raise insane amounts of capital at insane valuations who are now subsequently crashing and burning on the other side. But we saw that sort of hype cycle go. And obviously, we're pre seed, we're writing relatively small checks on day one. Incorporate a company, open up a bank account, put money in the bank account. So for us, valuations were not affected by hype cycles, but we did see, of course, founders looking at the studio model and saying, well, do I really need a studio? Because I can go raise $5 million off of a pitch deck from top tier investors and roll the dice that way. And it's like, so founders interested in our model, I think, is grown over time, in part now because the market is going the other way. So I think that's changed. I think in the Canadian context, I think from a investment perspective, Canada never heats up as much as the US does. That's not a bad thing necessarily, because I think we have less like crazy ups and downs, but we cool down faster, right? More conservative, more risk averse in terms of deploying capital. So now what you see is less money going in at that pre-seed and seed stage. And that makes me nervous, not just for studios as a model, but just in general, because I think we need more companies being created, not fewer companies being created.
Given the hype cycle or investment in AI as kind of a core technology, how do you feel like that is already changing or needs to change the venture studio process?
Yeah, so AI is one of these big, messy topics, of course. And every startup that is pitching today at the pre seed or seed stage, or even later stage, is now being asked, encouraged, or forced to incorporate an AI story into the pitch. So that's happening. Um, then you see the call it a backlash, where some people are like, no, that's already old news. I'm like, oh my, how can that be old? Like the news cycle that we watch on TV cycles pretty fast, right? People's attention spans get shorter and shorter, and I think it happens in venture capital as well, where it's like AI is huge, and then next week it's like, no, it's too much AI. So to be honest with you, I try to stay out of most of the nonsense around hype and try to stick to the fundamentals of building good companies that solve real problems. But you have to look at AI as an enabling technology to solve those problems. Now, there's a lot of risk there as well, and we can talk about that. But it's sort of inevitable that it gets into almost everything today.
Last week, you posted something very interesting on social, and that's why I reached out to you to be a guest. You were concerned about how AI ventures were getting to market and some gaps, some steps they were skipping. Here, I'll read part of it. You expressed that there are challenges that many AI and automation startups will face because they're focused on the tech and not understanding the problems or customers enough. Basically,
Sure.
it sounds like you're very concerned that they don't really understand the use cases or the needs and that they're just rushing to build. Can you walk us through what you're seeing, what you believe might happen to these startups?
Yeah, the concern, it actually just comes down to fundamentals. So the easier it gets to build a company, if you think all the way back to 1996 when I first started, there was no cloud, there was barely an internet. So everything costs a lot of money to do. Then it gets cheaper and cheaper, so it gets easier and easier. That's not a bad thing. It enables more people to create companies, which I genuinely believe is a good thing. I always prefer to see more founders, not less founders. So that part of it's good, and AI does that as well. Uh, but what it does is it puts the attention on the solution and not the problem, and it makes it easy for people to attempt to solve problems that they don't really understand. So any of us can look at any process out there, whether we understand the industry or not, and say, well, that's a silly process. Why is it so slow? Why does it take so many people? AI can just do it for us. And that's not wrong. That's potentially a very true way of looking at it. But the problem is that when you only have a superficial understanding of a problem or an industry or the stakeholders in that industry, you're looking at you have a very small understanding of it. And so you're just trying to apply technology to an obvious problem. And if that problem is so obvious, it means that there are underlying problems that you don't understand. So you don't understand, why is that thing so slow? Why is it so hard for companies to hire great talent? I asked that question in 2007, before GenAI existed. We're like, well, that's stupid. We're smart. We'll fix that. And we started a company. We raised $2 million and lost our shirts. And that's because we didn't understand how HR really worked. We didn't understand that their metric was, asses in seats, not really hire the best people. We didn't really appreciate that most companies don't have a great story to tell. Their culture isn't awesome. And so what we did back then, just looking at this obvious massive problem, is the same thing many, many companies are doing now, because they see AI as the answer to everything. And that makes, what that means is, just a lot of these companies will go in, they'll have a cool technology. People will say, this is awesome technology, I love it. And then they'll never use it and they'll never buy it, because they don't understand the human stuff going on underneath that obvious problem.
I think of a post I saw today from Tom Goodwin. He posts a lot on LinkedIn about digital transformation. He's a bit of a contrarian. He's very outspoken and says some brilliant things sometimes. He was writing that basically, we're talking about personalized ads. They're selling you this idea of a personalized experience, but the reality is what you want is a better experience. And quite often, algorithms are tending to serve you based on your behaviors, not what you want. So there's always been this gap, and there's like a mismatched promise to what actually is happening. AI and a lot of those tools really seem to have this dilemma where perhaps we're building solutions, but not to the problem. We're building solutions from a very technocratic perspective. Maybe they'll struggle to find product market fit as a result. What do you believe?
It is just fundamentally going back to the basics of, am I solving a problem that actually matters? And do I understand the problem? So what we focus a lot on is not just the functional problem, but the social and emotional stuff going on as well. So it's easy to understand functional problems. You look at a process that's taking place in an industry and say, well, that's stupid. That's too slow. Why does that take 50 steps? Why are people transferring a file from point A to point B? Why are people transcribing things this way? None of it makes sense. I'll put technology, it's going to fix all the functional problems. What you don't understand necessarily are the social and emotional reasons, the human things going on underneath that. Like, well, that's somebody's job, and they ascribe value to themselves because of the job they do. You might look at the job and say, well, that's a stupid job because a computer can do it. But that person looks at that differently. Or people make decisions for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with solving a functional problem. Like, is this going to get me a promotion or not? Is this going to help me secure my job or not? Is this going to make me look cool amongst my friends or not? Some of that is rational and some of it's irrational. And so we forget the underlying human stuff when we look at functional problems. And so often when it's like technology being applied to stuff, all we focus on is the functional and not the social and emotional. By the way, like the other element of social emotional is like things like budgets and what people spend money on and why they spend money. So those elements inside of businesses too. Like we understand that on a consumer level, right? Like, why do people buy things that don't have functional value for status? But we do it in businesses too. Like, businesses are just groups of humans, and they have an ecosystem of power and status and emotion and conflict. And I think when we focus on the technology, everything is just about solving a functional problem and not understanding all of that complexity.
True. Those functional problems are really important and make sense to build product for them. And, let's think back to Slack. When it first came out, it solved a lot of functional problems. But now we're dealing with a market which is a lot more commoditized. It's densely packed with other competitors that do similar things to Slack. They solve the same jobs to be done in many respects. And the idea of paying for Slack just doesn't seem that relevant to me some days. When I look at the other things I can communicate, maybe a WhatsApp might be better. It, sometimes is more enjoyable to use. It feels like something I'm less likely to ignore, and that's really ultimately more important, wouldn't it be?
Yeah, that's fair. I actually use WhatsApp in a professional setting, often with international companies, where WhatsApp has like a lot of usage. Like Brazil, for example, they're using it for professional work stuff all the time. The other thing I think that this brings up for me is a lot of startups look at a problem. Again, they look at the functional and they say, well, that's absurd. I can fix that and make it better, cooler, faster, maybe cheaper. And they don't appreciate that the solution folks have, they consider good enough. And good enough is hard to beat. I have a better UI, it's a better UX, it's a better this, it does notifications faster, and it's like nobody cares. Because ripping something out and replacing it with your thing is a pain in the ass. It's complicated. I just spent 50K on this thing. You want me to go tell my boss that there's a better version now? Like, I'm not doing that. So, good enough in enterprise software in particular, but even small business software is very powerful. I mean, originally things like Slack and messaging were supposed to destroy email, but all we have is more email and now more messages. So it actually didn't do that. It solved maybe a different problem for people. So I think good enough is one of those things that a lot of founders don't really understand. Again, because they look at a process or a system and say, well, that's inefficient, I'll fix it. And the inefficiencies are not a bug, they're a feature.
At that point, I was recently hired by a weather company to investigate how to bring a new product to market that could disrupt by leveraging GenAI. And what I quickly found is that weather app market is really commoditized. It's super saturated. People are satisfied with the apps that they have. Those apps may not fill all of their needs, but it's good enough. And as a result of it, there's really not much desire to go out and switch. And the thing about it is that we can put the coolest features in front of anyone, but they're just not looking for them right now. And this is one of the problems with some of the AI products that are out today. They're solving problems and adding solutions that people can't even conceptualize in the exact moment. You're bringing solutions to market that they never even imagined. So it's almost like you need to sell them that they even need the solution before they even think about switching. It's just a bit of a disjointed process.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I completely agree. And then I think uh, it's easy to assume that what you're building is good enough, and maybe it is, is better, and maybe it is better in absence of the context around it.
I love that. I constantly talk to clients about like good enough is good enough for people. So it's like you are in an uphill battle. But this really makes me think about the fact that so many of these AI tools or AI startups that are rushing to market seem like these kind of one-off, singular, almost like feature qualities. And it just seems like that's such a bigger uphill battle for them to have to overcome when they're not integrated. They're not a part of a bigger suite. They're not a part of a bigger solution. And considering that there are so many of these AI products coming to market, and you've been through a couple of these hype cycles before, how can these AI startups increase the likelihood of actually surviving in the space of good enough?
I mean, of course, very tough. Like most startups will fail no matter what. And that's been true. I've been, doing this for like almost 30 years, building companies, investing in companies, and most fail no matter what hype cycle we're in or whatever enabling technologies exist. I think that will be true today as well. I think I still believe in the idea of solving a very specific problem and going in often with a wedge or a point solution. And that I think has been the sort of pervasive approach for a while. So I still believe in that approach, but I do think a lot of tools that do that, AI tools or otherwise, have to pretty quickly figure out how to expand. And sort of, I think of it like eating more of the customer journey. So if I understand, if I come in a point solution and I know what folks do before I want them using my solution, and I know what they're doing after. So I do understand the whole customer journey. I call it a day in the life of a customer. Then I can try to insert myself into their life, interrupt them with my better solution, but then try to expand to the left and to the right of that in the customer journey. I think more AI tools will start to look like SaaS tools, right? So they go in with some sort of AI widget or some AI feature, and then they'll have to think about how they build all the other stuff and realize, oh, I'm actually like a SaaS tool with AI capabilities, which, by the way, is what all the SaaS tools are also doing. So I still do believe in the go in as a wedge. I think that there's always this discussion of bundling and unbundling. So are we in a bundling phase where people just want one solution to rule them all because they're sick of buying 40 little SaaS products, or are we in an unbundling? I think it's probably both at the same time. And some folks, I actually was just reading Rippling, which is a pretty large sort of HR tech company, uh, publishes their sort of investment memos and progress reports, and they're talking about how they believe very much in the bundling, not the unbundling, where it's like like 40 SaaS tools. So, and I get that, but building like horizontal platforms very, very hard. So I still say wedge in, but be very aware of how you integrate into the customer journey, and then what pieces of that you can uh, eat to grow your value proposition.
With the current crop AI products, there's always this risk. Obviously, that OpenAI or Anthropic or whoever starts expanding, adding more features, more capabilities, and that your SaaS product becomes expendable. Which makes me think then that obviously bundling protects you, adds a moat, gives you true IP that isn't just an API call, because again, they can eat you rather easily. And that's one of the big risks.
I think that that's what will happen. Is a lot of these startups are features, and the incumbents in their space, whatever space that may be, will add some amount of AI capabilities. Even if it's a bit lipstick on a pig, they'll do it because it's the topic. And bosses are now telling employees, hey, go figure out our AI strategy, or go find a tool that will do this faster for us because I don't want to hire 100 people. And then the incumbents will say, oh, we have an AI widget, we have some AI capabilities, we integrated an AI chat assistant, and they'll be perfect, good enough, checks the boxes, the boss is happy, I solved our AI problem. So yes, I think a lot of them are features, a lot of them will not win, and that's just the reality of the situation. Now, it makes it harder from an investor perspective to figure out, okay, well, which of these may start as features but grow into real businesses. That's tough to understand or figure out. I think there are still lots of, so the areas that I'm interested in, I think, are what I describe as boring problems in boring industries, because those are places where the incumbents actually may not be good enough, like literally maybe so crappy that you could build better software and take market share, and that there's less people focused on because less people understand those problems. Now, it means that you have to understand those problems even better than, hey, how do I build a tool that does outbound email marketing? How do I build a tool that does some obvious basic thing, create graphics or whatever? So you have to then go into these industries, more old school legacy verticals, dig really deep to find these boring problems. But if you solve them with AI or otherwise, could be hugely valuable.
But in a situation like that, where, because I fully agree, so many of these products seem like features, and we're seeing every day these legacy incumbents that are building features that kind of eat those companies before they've even had a chance to really start. And you're saying, you're seeing the best opportunities are in these boring industries, but what kind of use cases or customer profiles do you truly personally believe are going to be the most or the best opportunities? Because there's probably also reasons why those legacy areas have not, or those boring industries have not really innovated as quickly. And I would assume that part of that is customer desire for those changes.
It's an interesting question. I think my what I see and as I talk to other investors in the space, adoption of AI technology does seem to be faster moving than other things in the past. So there's a possibility, like if you think about um, like developing continents or countries where they kind of skipped the internet we had. They skipped like almost computer, and they just went right to the mobile phone. Right? It's like we just went to payments, everything on the mobile phone. Whereas in North America, it was more laptops, desktops, like computers, old school internet, speed it up. But they went right to the phone. There is a possibility in certain verticals because of what AI can do, and maybe actually solve problems in ways that people didn't realize, that it accelerates that technology adoption. And so people who previously were like, I don't want to buy these SaaS tools. I'm going to use my spreadsheet. I'm going to use my paper. I'm not ready to adopt this tool. Say, wait a second, this AI stuff might actually leapfrog. So I think that that is a possibility in a number of industries and verticals that are slower to adopt things. And it got such a, like when OpenAI, came out with ChatGPT, and then literally everybody not everybody, like 180 million users, which is a lot of people, started using it. I think it forced this requirement that everybody look at it and try to figure out what it could do for their business, as opposed to, oh, the web or web-based tools. Well, I don't really need to look at those necessarily. So I think we will see that acceleration.
That makes complete sense, especially if you think about other countries, other languages. That leapfrog activity is something that could really benefit businesses. And in fairness, a lot of SaaS products just seem complicated. Conversely, when we look at some of these copilots and agents, they really could fulfill on that promise, expanding what your team is capable of without adding a lot of complexity. Interestingly, when we talk to people who are actively building or consulting on AI products, it does seem like clients right now are still looking for productivity gains more so than replacing humans, but we'll see if that changes.
It's the notion of everybody having some version of a co-pilot that assists them in their job. I do think it will inevitably automate some things that humans were doing. I don't know how that doesn't happen, where everybody keeps their job and we've automated everything at the same time and everybody's happy. Like, I don't know how that plays out. But I think, yes, today it is an efficiency thing. Now the risk, again, so back to some of the earlier conversation, the risk of selling efficiency is it really does have to translate into making more money or saving money in a way that you can actually measure, because saving time is not an awesome value proposition. So again, a lot of companies go, oh, I can make that process more efficient. I can save you 10 hours a week. And a buyer of software will look at that and say, well, what am I going to do with those 10 hours a week? Do I now let somebody go because I don't need them? Do I move them to part time? Can that person do other work that was higher order value? And that's really the value proposition. Does saving that time allow that person to sell more, drive revenue, or save costs somewhere else? So you have to find the real value prop underneath efficiency. But to me, that is a obvious place for these things to work. I think it's efficiency within organizations, and then I think it's also efficiency between companies. So that can be things like supply chain, logistics, like anywhere where there are multiple people, which is almost everywhere, where there are multiple people in a chain who are supposed to be communicating effectively with one another. I do think AI can automate and speed up some of those processes and create value.
I worked on a project about a year and a half ago where it was for an insurance company. And I recall a big part of that project was about trying to identify what is it that employees that were really excelling, what were they doing, and how did that then translate into a good customer experience so that then the, let's say, lower performing employees knew how to elevate. And because nothing that they expected seemed to be making any difference. And so I recall a big insight from that work was about the fact that the vocabulary that employees were using was different than the interpretation of that vocabulary for customers. And and so a big part of it was how do we merge, what that meant to each other so that those employees could then understand why what they were doing was effective. And that makes me think about what you were just saying about these co-pilots and how do we enhance the ability of employees to maybe not save time, but how can we use something like a co-pilot to elevate everybody to performing at a level that is maybe more effective. So, what's in your personal opinion the qualities or the things that make for a good co-pilot or a co-pilot company that could actually succeed?
Yeah. So for me, I think it is about helping people level up. So I think that's an interesting, back to the example you were providing of, there's some high performers, there's some low performers. I can't tell the difference. AI may be able to because it can listen in, it can interpret, it can read things faster, make decisions in a way faster with more data. Can it then help train and elevate other people's performance? I think access to information, again, like Arpy, you mentioned Slack before, and one of its big problems is just like there's just so much content in it, it's impossible to get to. And so, how do I go back to that thing that actually did work? How do I use that as a template the next time so I don't have to recreate the wheel every single time? So for me, a co-pilot is about like literally the way it's described is a co-pilot for things that I need to get done, automating some things, but also helping elevate my ability to do my job better by removing some of the friction of repetitive tasks or even memory of like, oh, what was that thing I did last time that worked? Did it work? I don't remember. And AI, just because again, it has access to everything and can process faster, should be able to help with those things.
This reminds me of when cloud computing came online. We were sold on this promise, oh, upload everything to the cloud and you'll have it everything in one place. You'll never lose it. But then instead of that, we got Dropbox, we got Google, we got our OneDrive, and everything's more fragmented than ever. We're losing content and information, all kinds of direction. I just wonder if AI, part of its promise is maybe to solve this, to have a centralized brain, a second brain in a sense, something you can quiz and never lose anything from. From a personal perspective or business perspective, there's a lot of value from that. But perhaps it'll be different from a B2C perspective than a B2B perspective. But I guess it depends where we go from here. But I just hope we don't get that kind of double switch again, where cloud computing again was an idea to help solve fragmentation, but instead it turned into something which led to more creation, more loss. But equally, it makes you wonder who's actually going to win this war between OpenAI, Microsoft, Anthropic, Google. Everybody has their hands in there. And as we saw with cloud computing, no one ended up winning, which meant that we all lost.
Oh yeah, I'm not great at the prognosticating the future of who wins necessarily. I do think that I look, the reason those tools, Slack, WhatsApp, messaging, document storage, like there's so many, there's a bunch of them. Things are everywhere. It's because those tools enable us to just create more stuff. So the more, that's why Slack doesn't destroy email, because it's just like, cool, now I can email you and I can message you. So I can like hassle you in two places and create two bits of content at the same time. So they really are just content generating machines. I can upload files here. Amazing. I'll upload them there and I'll store them over here as well. So I don't think AI solves that problem, because in a way it allows us to create more stuff even faster than we were before. Write 1,000 articles about XYZ and AI can do it for you. So I think it just creates more content, but it does potentially allow us to connect those things together more effectively. So if you can connect the tools that you're using and imagine something sitting on top of all of those tools. So maybe you do have point solution, you're running a business, you have point solutions that do specific things, but now, and most of those tools have APIs, but and sometimes they can talk to each other, but they don't do it super effectively. So is there somebody that creates something that, AI driven, that sits on top of the things that you're running, that does in fact have access to everything? Yeah, I get that privacy is a concern and people are more concerned about it with AI. I think that privacy concerns never go away and we should be concerned about those things. but most people in their day-to-day lives don't actually care as much as they should, but they just don't if it's getting the job done. So I think I think that that's probably the enterprise companies, the Googles of the world and others that who say like, look, we'll build stuff on top that does enterprise search properly for inside the organization. We'll build the things that connect all the dots. And then those companies will just have to figure out how comfortable they are with the walled gardens that they built being poked at a little bit. And some do it, use Salesforce as an example. They, I mean, in a way, a walled garden, but they have apps, right? So they have apps that you can integrate in that do more things for you inside of Salesforce. And then I think, some version of universal AI tools get built to try to string those things together even more effectively.
I've been looking at a lot of how enterprise products position themselves, and at the top of that value offering is almost always security. It must mean that their clients and their stakeholders are really asking for that maybe adoption's being held up by fears about security, about who will have access to that data, how that data will train the system. And in fairness, when you look at the terms and conditions, a lot of these products, it's very, very unclear what they do with your data. So I'm wondering if some of these products are going to sacrifice usability for the sake of delivering a more secure experience.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with first of all, the rapid explosion of AI technology after OpenAI. So OpenAI comes out with ChatGPT. I mean, it had been around for a while. Not a lot of people were paying an enormous amount of attention. They come up with this user experience. People are like, oh my God, I can ask this thing anything and it gives me an answer. Isn't that the coolest thing ever? So I think it's the speed with which that got into public consciousness accelerated the conversation around, wait a second, what is happening to all my data? These are the same people asking those questions who scroll Facebook, Instagram, TikTok all day long, do whatever they're doing in those platforms, and have already given away all their data. Like, if you don't think all of your data is already gone, I think you're naive. But OpenAI explodes. People are like, wait a second, I'm feeding. You want me to upload files into that? Are you out of your mind? I would never do that. Meanwhile, you've got your file in a Google Drive publicly shared. So, so I think it's the PR part of it. So now the reaction has to be from software companies, security. It's a little bit like Steve Ballmer yelling, developers, security, to try to give people confidence that their data isn't going to be exposed. Or shared or used to train or whatever it is that they're worried about. I think those concerns go away over time. There are more data breaches of just companies, nothing to do with AI, that happen every single day. It pops in the news for 20 seconds and then goes away. Every password, every whatever, every credit card. And meanwhile, we're like, wait a second, you want me to upload a file to AI and then train a model? Like, no, I would never do that.
But then if you go down the rabbit hole of potential AI agents, one could be an agent that is not built by the proprietary company. So let's say an agent to help me manage and create and optimize Google Ads. That Google Ads experience is terrible. You keep getting bounced between portal to other portal. It's really frustrating. I'm just wondering what's going to happen and what businesses are going to do once you start having these other agents, having the access that you do and doing the things that you're supposed to be doing. Because let's be fair, that's actually where the time savings are going to come into play. But there's so many privacy concerns and so many questions about who owns the IP, who has access, et cetera, et cetera.
Companies are nervous. So like a Google, AdWords, Facebook with ads, companies are nervous about agents, let's say, being the thing using the software. Because like every time you sign into something these days with a CAPTCHA or a reCAPTCHA, like, are you a human? That's because we don't want computers doing, like, bots doing these things. Agents are just smart bots. So eventually, I think we have to get to a place where, today you have companies that will help you generate an ad, right? So like generate the visuals, generate the right text, create 100 versions of that based on what you've told it, who you're targeting, and all of that. So you have ad generation. You can automate a lot of that. The next step is great. Now put those ads on the right platforms, whatever those platforms may be, decide on the right pricing and the bidding and everything else that has to be done, monitor the results and constantly just do that work for me. So I don't have to sit there, refreshing Google AdWords to see what performance looks like. So companies are nervous about that because it's basically allowing bots to do the work of humans. But for agents to actually work, which are things doing work on our behalf, we're going to have to allow that to happen. But today, it's just the content generation piece that exists with ads.
Yeah, and it sounds like that's such a big part of the barrier to finding real use cases that people need, right? Solving problems that would actually help businesses generate more revenue or be more effective. And, in your book, you wrote about the importance of finding the right metrics, and you detailed out a range of analytics frameworks, but this was also written 10 years ago. And if we consider that you mentioned right now, a lot of the key metrics for these AI tools are: we save you time, we give you back time, we give you back efficiency. And it sounds like those are not very good metrics to be measuring against. So, are there new metrics and business models that you'd like to add to the AI startup teams today?
What's emerging now is more usage-based pricing, although it's still very early days. I was just reading something today actually from the site's called Growth Unhinged, and they did an analysis of 50 or so AI companies and what their business models look like. And it turns out they're still basically like SaaS businesses. We charge per license, we charge per seat, we charge per user, like anything else. The irony, I think, of that being that if you are making things more efficient, you actually genuinely need less users or licenses. And we know that most companies buy SaaS products and spend too much on licenses that aren't getting utilized. I mean, I swear that's probably half the business model for most SaaS startups is the non-used licenses. So I do think usage-based pricing, if I was writing lean analytics today, usage-based pricing would definitely be a part of that model. More around, how do you measure automation? Is it measuring the lack of usage? If AI is supposed to do our job for us, then you don't need me clicking all the buttons. Therefore, instrumenting your app to track events and making sure Ben is in there clicking the right, it doesn't matter anymore because the AI is doing, the clicking. And so now I think usage, the discussion around, is usage a good thing, a bad thing, what amount of usage, what type of usage? Do I need to make sure that the human is clicking the trigger and then the AI does the rest of the work? And then I verify the results, use image generation as an example, which I use all the time, which still blows me away, that you can type text in and get it. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm like a kid, but every time it happens, I'm like, I can't believe it. But, how do you measure customer happiness or success there in image generation? It's maybe they stopped asking, like editing the image, right? So put a prompt, get an image, fantastic, download the image, I'm done. Check mark, time to value short, success. OpenAI asks you, did I get this right? Did I get it wrong? Those feedback loops become more important than a typical SaaS business because now we're relying on the computer to do more of the work for us. So those are some of the things, to me, some of the usage patterns, the behaviors that you would want to be tracking have to change when you're trying to automate more things.
As much as there is a lot of optimism about AI and just emerging technology in general, all of us working in tech are also living under a lot more anxiety and pressure to get things right, not make things worse than in recent memory. So, what advice do you have for individuals who want to be founders or who want to be working on these teams and taking the risk of joining a startup in an early stage?
It's interesting. I think I agree with the premise of the question, which is I think there is a lot more stress. Well, is there more stress? I don't know. Are we more aware of it? When I started my first company in 96, even 2007, we weren't talking about mental health. we were talking about grinding. That's all we talked about, was just grinding, grinding, grinding. I think, thank goodness we didn't really have when the iPhone came out. But at the end of the day, like, we weren't recording everything we were doing in life, and so, which I'm like, thank goodness, because I would probably be pretty embarrassed about how many times I told people to get back to work and grind. So I think we're more aware and more conscious and more comfortable talking about human challenges that we face, mental health, working from home. I mean, COVID changed a lot because, hybrid didn't really exist. Remote existed, but so I think things are evolving and changing. My feeling for folks that want to start companies is the fundamentals are still the fundamentals. So, like, lean analytics is 10 years old. The examples, I don't know if a single company in those case studies still exists today even, right? That's the world of tech. It changes. But the lessons of lean startup, the principles of things like jobs to be done and design thinking are just true today. They remain the same. So if you stick to those fundamentals and you understand them and ground yourself in those things, then go for it and start a company. Don't remortgage your house. Don't end up living in your car. Don't take absurd risks. But I've never looked at starting a company as being terribly risky, because I always thought, well, as long as I have a roof and I can pay for some basic food, and then eventually I had family and support my family, it's not that risky because I can always then go find a job. So to me, I don't think the risk of starting a company is any higher than it's ever been. And again, I do believe we need more founders. I do think we have to be more aware of, all the circumstances around that and the challenges faced by our environment.
Ben, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Where can people find your newsletter, and what kind of nuggets will they find in it?
Yeah, so I started a newsletter over a year ago now. It's called focusedchaos.co. I wish I could get the .com. I think it's maybe for sale, but for more money than I wanted to spend on it. So focusedchaos.co is where to find the newsletter. Try to write every week on venture studios, product management, entrepreneurship. It's a bit of a mixed bag for folks. It's not as singularly focused as newsletters are supposed to be, but whatever, it's mine, so I can do what I want. And then people are welcome to always connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on X as well, but more so on LinkedIn, and always happy to connect with founders and learn from them and share.